Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Transportation for America's Smart Cities Collaborative informational webinar about the year 3 of our Smart Cities Collaborative. We're really excited to talk to you about next year and answer any questions that you might have. But before I do, I'd just like to go over what we plan on covering today. We'll talk about the leadership for the collaborative in year 3, the program structure, how we're focusing on curbside management and why, really what does it take for you to qualify, the timeline that we'll be working off of, how you can apply, some frequently asked questions we've received, and then give you time to answer questions, to ask us questions, and we can answer. Just as a reminder, we are going to ask that you submit all of your questions in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You can see a chat right there. And so please type your questions in at any point, and we'll make sure to get to as many questions we have by the end of the hour. So with that, let's get started. So my name is Emiko Atherton. I'm the person on the lower part of the screen. I run the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a program of Smart Growth America, and we work to promote the development of complete streets policies and implementation across the United States and North America. The reason that I'm really involved in the collaborative this year and working with Beth Osborne, who will introduce herself shortly, is that we've really found that there's a big connect between infrastructure and what we call complete streets and the integration of new technology and mobility, and really things all come to head quite literally at the curb. And so we're really bringing that infrastructure and multimodal perspective to the collaborative next year. And I'll turn it over to Beth, who can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Beth Osborne. I'm the Director of Transportation for America. Transportation for America is a membership organization of local governments, MPOs, chambers of commerce, that are all seeking a transportation system that connects people to jobs and services by multiple modes of transportation. We look to do this in a way that serves all kinds of people equitably, whether they come from low or high income households, neighborhoods that are affluent or less affluent, and people of all ethnicities. We are also seeking to do this by talking about what works in the current program through research and analysis, advocacy with local, state, and federal policymakers, and general thought leadership. We are very much involved in smart cities because we know that these new technologies have the potential to disrupt our systems in both positive and negative ways, and we want to make sure that it is being deployed in a way that matches our mission, that again is connecting people to jobs and opportunity, no matter what neighborhoods they come from, no matter their background, and no matter their income.
Great, thank you, Beth. So I know some of you who are calling in have been part of the collaborative in the past, but to many of you on the call, this is your first introduction. So we wanted to cover what is the Smart Cities Collaborative. And what it is at its core is it's a year-long opportunity for peer cities and agencies to come together from the private sector and talk about your experiences dealing with new mobility and the integration of new mobility into your transportation systems, working with those private providers, many of us that came from an agency where this is new to us, and then determining the best practices for maximizing the benefits of these emerging modes, really, and to build off what Beth said, making sure that we have our values and then those values reflected in policy and practice first. That we are definitely not a neutral body on this. You know, we have a very vested interest in equity and getting people to places in a way that maximizes really the benefits of transportation for all users while minimizing, I think, congestion, climate change, a reliance on one type of mode of automobiles, the continuation of the highway system. And so really, how do we bring those values that many of us say that we care about into the transportation space at the same time that we balance a lot of new modes and a rate of change many of us are not familiar with? And how do we quickly take something like policy and be able to react to that, but also our practices? We've laughed at the rate of change in transportation since I left about 6 years ago there's been more change in transportation since I left an agency 6 years ago than there was the entire time I probably spent studying and working in transportation before. And we all know that, like the built environment, we're used to being able to move slowly, and now there's a need for us to move quickly. So the collaborative in the past, just to get a sense for those of you who haven't participated, as I mentioned, has been happening 3 years. Just to give a sense of what we did last year, we brought together 23 cities and regions, including places like San Francisco, Madison, Wisconsin, Houston, Indianapolis, but also cities like New York, to Centennial, Colorado, so you can see a really range in size and places, and covered issues such as micromobility policies, dealing with the network companies or the Ubers and Lyfts, talking about curbside management, how to deal with data, how to bring your community's equity policies and values into your work. And we met 4 times last year, really as this peer learning network. And so this year, however, we're focusing and getting a little bit more zeroed in on the curb. And I'm going to let Beth talk about kind of how we wound up really focusing on curbs and curbside management in year 3.
Yeah, at the end of last year, when we were talking about, what we've learned over the first 2 years of convening the leading cities that are interested in incorporating technology into their transportation system and being a smart and well-connected city, we were discussing wanting to get more involved in actual practices and pilots. And the area that most cities seem particularly interested in is figuring out how to better deploy the curb, which is, as many say, their most valuable asset, to something more than just parking. This is an asset that is in huge demand for, frankly, so many different uses. It's hard to imagine how we can make space for all of them at once, but certainly we need to find ways to make room for more than just, what is often just free parking. And looking for ways to experiment and try out new ways to share that space and flex it from one use to another is something that, frankly, most of the cities that participated over the last 2 years were interested in. And like I said, we'd spent 2 years talking about what cities' experiences had been and what the challenges are, and we just wanted to get down to brass tacks and actually experiment at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. And I'll just add on that, often when we're talking about the integration of technology into our built environment, it's either something that hasn't happened yet, like AVs, or it's something that we often don't interface with on a day-to-day. And the curb is really, to me, the perfect space to not only test out solutions, but test out solutions that really have to deal with the new and the old. The curb is, as old as our cities, as old as we've had our cities, and yet at the same time, it's the most competitive and somewhat the most valuable space in our cities right now, in part because of the introduction of new technologies, but some we've known since the car. So we have the demands of parking, we have the demands of freight, we have the demands of multiple modes, we have the data that happens on the curb and how we collect that data. We have how do our curbs actually reflect what we care about. If we say that we care about the safety of our users, how do we manage a curb space that protects our most vulnerable modes, such as bicyclists or people on wheels, at the same time that we really rely on these spaces for the delivery of goods and services? We now require drop-off and pick-up stations, and many of your cities have relied on the revenue from parking to fund a lot of your departments. And so really this is where we see old and new collide, both in modes and in technologies, but also where we can really start to actualize solutions. So unlike previous years where we brought together just one cohort, we'll have 2 cohorts that meet at different times this year, and we're calling the first cohort the pilot cities and the second the peer cities. So the pilot cities I'll start with first. We're seeking applications for cities and agencies that really wish to participate in the curbside pilot. We'll select 3 cities total, and each of these cities must commit to at least a 1-month pilot on curbside management covering at least one city block of their space. In addition to that, they must commit to providing event space for one of the 3 times the pilot cities will all get together, and that they need to participate in all 3 meetings throughout the year. And the first, I'll get more into the schedule, but the first meeting is just for the pilot cities. They also will participate in 3 distance learning webinars, and if they are selected, there'll be no fee associated with them participating in the collaborative. One part of the qualifications that I want to make sure to cover is we have cities down, although you don't have to be a city as the leading agency, but you do need to have the ability to make decisions and actually build and construct in the right-of-way. And so, typically we wouldn't see like a regional authority be the prime applicant on this, because they most likely do not, although not always, but most of them do not have the ability to directly build in the right-of-way. And so we are looking for that lead applicant to be that agency. The peer cities, on the other hand, are the cities that are really excited about new mobility, technology, and curbside management, but perhaps not ready in 2020 to do a curbside pilot, but are dealing with this issue and other issues around issues that impact the curb but impact new mobility overall, so data collection again, permitting, essentially the allocation of space. And we're calling these the peer cities. And so we're also soliciting applications for peer cities, and we'll select 12 to 15 cohorts out of that. In addition to being able to participate in 2 meetings, so they'll be able to participate in all 3 webinars, and there is a fee associated with this, which covers accommodations and also the cost of delivering the workshops, and that's $45,000 per participant. The recommended size for each of these cohorts is, we say, at least 5 participants for the pilot cities. We really want to encourage cities also to think outside the box about who is part of their cohort that applies. Often, it will be your Department of Public Works or Department of Transportation, but think about who else might need to be involved to make sure that this pilot not only happens, but it can stay up and that there's some buy-in for it and that there might be some lessons learned. So you might think about bringing in people from the transit agency, maybe from your public health department, a business improvement district or a BID, law enforcement. You might think about, who deals even within your agency with freight, not just your innovation and new mobility staff, your parking staff, your active transportation staff. So be thinking across those lines. And then peer cities, we'd love to have, although we won't keep any city that just has 1 participant. I think having at least 2 to 5, if not more, is a really good sweet spot so that people are able to come back, so you are able to come back with a colleague, talk about what you learned, be able to share those best practices with the rest of your agency or your city. So we really hope that you'll be able to at least have 2 people apply within that. In terms of the timeline, we wanted to lay out what's going to happen. So we'll be able to select both the pilot and peer cities in early November, and then we'll have our first convening of just the pilot cities in the winter, so probably in late January, February, and it will be just those 3 pilot cities for the 2 full days. We'll then convene in late spring, so May or June, for 3 days. Day 1 will be just the pilot cities, and then on days 2 and 3 we'll have those peer cities come join us. We'll be able to look at the pilot project, the curbside pilot that city, the host city, is working on. And we'll have sessions that really talk about what are some of the best practices and the learnings that are coming from that pilot, as well as other emerging issues that are occurring within the smart city space. By September and October, we'll have our final in-person convening. Day 1, again, will be just the pilot cities, and then days 2 and 3, the peer cities will join again. By that time, we'll be able to look at that host city's pilot project on the ground and talk about really the implementation, but also the evaluation of that. And then in October and December, Transportation for America will be working with the pilot cities to write case studies and do evaluations of the public. In terms of the locations of each of these, I should mention that each training will take place in one of the pilot cities. and so those locations are not determined yet because those will be determined again by who the pilot cities are. But we'll meet first in one pilot city, and then in the second time we'll shift to the next pilot city, and we'll have the peer cities join us there as well, so that we can get on the ground and look at the project that they're planning. And then in September and October again, we'll meet in that final pilot city where we'll be able to actually see the project on the ground and see it in use and talk about how to evaluate what's going on there. So hopefully by now you're really excited and you're eager to apply. So to apply, what you want to do is actually look at our website. If you are a pilot city, we do ask that you have a letter of support from an elected official. We think this is really important because we want to make sure that you've taken time to be able to get buy-in for your elected officials so they know it's coming. So when you start planning it and eventually moving towards implementation, there's political support. And then please let us know if you're a pilot city. If you are not selected as a pilot city, if you are interested in being a peer city. So that will be part of the application process. In terms of applying as a peer city, it's a very similar application, although it requires less detail. And on the Smart Cities Collaborative homepage, you'll see links to both the pilot city applications and the peer city applications. And at the end, we'll also share our contact information, so you'll be able to send us any additional questions as you complete the application, and we are available to answer those at any time. At this point, I want to move on to some frequently asked questions that we've received from all of you, and then open it up to all of you for questions. So the first that we received a lot is, what does a peer city 4,500 feet cover? So it does cover tuitions and accommodations, the food that goes along with that. What it doesn't cover is plane travel. We do ask the cities to book their own planes within that, but it will cover all the food, access to the best practices and the webinars, access to us throughout the collaborative to bounce ideas back up. We'll have special materials and reports available just for you. The second is, can MPOs, transit agencies, and bids apply? And our answer is, we love to have you in the room. You're such an important part of the Curbside pilots. We do ask that you partner again with the agency or the authority that has the ability to make the decision about the right-of-way. However, if you are applying as a peer community, you are able to apply without that implementing agency. So if you're an MPO that does not have a city partner, you are welcome to apply as a peer member, and the same applies to transit agencies and bids. The next is, what makes a good application? I'll answer this, and then I'll let Beth answer this as well. What we're really looking for and how we run competitive applications is, have you really gotten a good, particularly for the pilot cities, have you reached out to kind of the non-traditional partners, people who will need to be involved to make your curbside pilot possible? I think, are you thinking about the issues not just from an implementation, but from really a policy level? How are you thinking about how this project will actually, achieve your larger policy and value goals? And then, I'd love to hear about what you plan to do kind of as a result of this curbside pilot. Beth, what will you be screening for?
Certainly all the things you said, but recognizing that the curb has been dedicated to parking as long as any of us can remember, and even trying something different is going to involve, what some people will feel like is taking space away from them. So I'm going to be looking to make sure that the decision makers who are necessary to hold up that decision, even on a temporary basis, and make sure that the pilot can weather any criticism initially, are involved, and very clearly personally giving time to the project so that it has a high opportunity for success.
I think that's great. We are really excited for next year, and Beth and I, along with our technical support and our teams, will be investing a lot in this. But I think, having that same investment in back makes a really good application. And it's actually amazing when you read these, you can tell how excited the community is just through their application. So really expressing kind of your excitement and your desire and your commitment to do that, because that's a huge factor. I think Beth brought up a lot again, the reason that we require that letter is that not everybody might love your project. In fact, probably there will be people that don't, and making sure that you're willing to stick with it for that pilot period and learn from it is critical. So with that, I think we're going to move it to questions. As a reminder, you can type your questions into the lower left-hand corner, and I think we'll have time to get to all of your questions today. And so I'll start by reading the first question, was what are examples of curb pilots that you're interested in seeing proposed or have you heard might be proposed? Beth, did you want to take a first stab at answering that?
The sorts of projects that we have heard about are projects that might swing the use of the curb to different uses throughout the day. Look for space particularly to deal with better and safer pick-up and drop-off of people who are using various car services. And really, we're open to anything. There's not any particular pilot that we're looking for. We're just looking for something that will, create a more broad use for that curb, and will do it with some purpose in mind. So we're hoping that the city comes forward because, for example, they're looking to facilitate more multimodal transportation, or they're looking to make it easier for people to safely move around outside of a vehicle, or they are looking to, frankly, use this as a better funding generator. But I want to know what you're trying to accomplish with it other than just trying something for the purpose of trying it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of add on a couple answers. First is ones that are really looking to, I think, maximize the public value of that space, not ones that are just kind of giving over to, private goods and mobility services, but really how do they balance really the people that often have the least voice in terms of the curbside allocation, which is vulnerable users. The other thing that I think I would be looking for in a really good pilot is one that ends up becoming, although each curb, just like each of your cities, is unique, one that can be used as a good use case for other cities to learn from, because we do want to make sure that this is something that we can distill best practices from. I would say one that isn't the easiest choice in your community. One that's not exactly not being, we want one that actually does have conflicts already existing where there is a problem to solve. With all of that said, it is okay if you do not have your final pilot in mind, like where the exact address or intersection before you come in January. A lot of what we like to do is actually, start talking in January about what are the goals you want to achieve, what does success look like, and then look at some of your data and some of your curbs, and so you don't have to have a certain curb or amount of space in mind as you go forward. You're also able to have, if you are willing to run this on multiple locations throughout your city, that's okay too, as long as you feel that you have the capacity to do so. The minimum requirement is 1 month and 1 city block, but you are welcome to do more. But again, it is not count against you if you have not decided what that project is prior to your application. I think that's just as strong, because that's a lot of what we'll be doing in January, is actually scoping out what you're trying to achieve and what location in your city might help you achieve that. I think, can you provide an example of curbside interventions you were thinking of for pilot cities to implement? Beth touched on flex space. I think there's, I'm just going to throw out things that pilots and interventions that deal with the idea of storage. I'd say storage of cars, storage of scooters, storage of bicycles, storage of furniture. That's really interesting to me. I think curbside interventions that take transit into account are really interesting to me. Beth, do you think of some others?
I've been very interested in the cities that have found ways to create more curb space. I've seen in a couple of places where they have created areas for transit to move in and out of traffic and create areas that separate bicyclists, and in doing so, they're investing in ways to have curbs on both sides. So that's really interesting to me. This is a finite resource, and yet some areas are finding a way to make it a little less finite. So that's kind of cool. I am very interested in cities that are trying to do this in maybe less traditional areas. It's really easy to do this in your most thriving area. These are areas where you might find a ton of congestion and have a lot of conflict, but we really would like to see those that are working to better neighborhoods that have traditionally been underinvested.
Great. The next question is, would pilot cities have to cover the cost of their participants' travel to the other two cities? What I would say is, at this point, yes, they would just have to cover the cost of plane fare. We would cover accommodations. However, if that is a barrier to your participation, I would note that in the proposal, and as we acquire additional funding, we can definitely take that into consideration. So I would not let that stop you from applying, but I would have you let us know because we may be able to secure additional funding to cover some, if not all, of that plane fare. The next question is, how do you define cities that are eligible for the program? So, as I mentioned before, we in the collaborative, I think, are really strong because we've worked with cities throughout the country and communities both large and small. The only thing I would say for the pilot cities is that the only requirement is you need to be able to actually have authority over your right-of-way. But if you are a peer city, again, I think any type of city that's willing to come and learn and be active and participate in the discussion is a great candidate. What we're looking for is cities that are eager to share, but also cities that are eager to learn and really feel that this is something valuable for them. And my next question is, sorry, this is where my eyes. Can you say more about how T4A will support evaluations of the projects? So what we'll be doing with our technical team is actually working with the 3 pilot cities for before and after the implementation of the project. So we'll be talking, I'd say there's 2 types of evaluations. One is the before and after. What's the actual quantitative and qualitative data you want to gain based on what you're trying to achieve out of that? And then afterwards, we'll be doing both kind of we'll help you through our best practices talk about the quantitative and qualitative story that comes out of that. This is not a hard evaluation, although we welcome you to really do some strong data, some good counting, but that we want to be able to distill best practices, but we'll help you. Our technical team can help you set up both, again, the qualitative and quantitative measures you're looking to get out of this, again, based on what you want to capture.
But that is, again, why it's really important that you let us know why you want to do this and what it is you're trying to learn from it. So if you're trying to learn whether or not this is a way to raise money for your transportation system, we want to know that. If you're trying to find out if this is a way to more safely move people through the corridor, we want to know that.
Yeah.
And that will help us to identify the best measures of success and figure out the best way to tell the story. Obviously, the sort of project you're going to do when you're trying to promote multimodal travel is very different than the one you're going to do when you're trying to promote fundraising. And so measuring its success and figuring out whether or not it's accomplished what you want it to accomplish depends very much on your articulating that result that you're seeking.
Yeah, that's great. We're a really big fan here of performance measures, but with that said, performance measures that are actually capturing, I say less is more.
Yeah.
The ones that you actually care about. And those are both quantitative and qualitative. The ones that support the story that you're trying to tell, the information you're trying to collect, and not just data for data's sake. And that's something I think we strongly believe in. So the next question is, are you looking for cities that already have initiatives to pilot curbside interventions, or are you looking for cities that are newly approaching this issue? Both. I think what we'd really be looking for
Nice to have a mix.
Yeah,
anyway.
it's a mix, as Beth just said. Is one of the things when we put together these cohorts is that we're looking for cities that are at, can learn from each other and the peer cities can learn from, but are not all identical. And so I think a good mix of both would be really interesting because we want cities that really we can distill different best practices from. I mean, and that's one of the things is ultimately we're looking to put together a cohort of both the pilot cities and then the larger peer cities that we really feel is the right mix between cities that are dealing with kind of universal issues, but at the same time there are different points in that there are different points kind of in their journey to do that, and that there's unique things about each of those cities and participants.
Now, if you are a city that has done something like this before, we would love for this new pilot to be testing something different than you've tested in the past. We're really not looking to pick someone who's already tested and learned a lesson to do it again. So if you could let us know what you've done in the past and how this experiment might be different or build on what you've done in the past, that would help us a lot.
Great. The next question is, will there be any additional funding available for funding of technology or other needs for pilots? So what we will make sure that you do is that we are working with the private mobility companies to make sure that you have the technology you need to manage that pilot. So it may not be direct cash, but we will make sure to have those services in some form available to you. So if you're looking at a data sharing system, we are working in conversations right now with the providers to make sure that, I know some of you have participated in the collaborative have seen that there are sponsors, but the way that we're approaching it this year is to make sure that those sponsors are actually offering those services for free, and they're also offering the technical assistance to use their products for free without selling to the rest of the collaborative. But we're interested in getting those good products to you in a way that is at no cost and at the same time not pushing one or two projects only or products only. The next question is, how many cities have already applied, either as pilots or peers? So I would say I have not looked at that recently, but we have had, I guess the best way to answer this without me knowing the direct answer of this is that what's really interesting about this year is we've heard that many of the same cities plan on applying as have been part of our similar past collaboratives, but we're also hearing from a lot of new cities that are very interested in trying this out. I don't want to call anyone out specifically on this webinar, but this has been a really fun to see as we've gotten much more specific about what we're dealing with, a lot of the usual suspects, but also new partners from all different types of, from large cities and some mid-sized communities and smaller communities as well. And then the last question is, do you envision curbside monitoring technologies, cameras, sensors, staff observations playing a part in this evaluation? I would say, like Beth, again, this depends on what the city is hoping to achieve. If this is something that you're interested in actually using that, we would certainly not, we would not say you need to use this just to do the pilot. I think the question is, what are you trying to measure, and is this actually the best way to capture that data? And if it is, then that would be something that could be integrated into your pilot. If it's not, and it's just kind of like a fancy bell and whistle, then no. So I think it's more about getting what are you actually trying to measure, what do you care about, and then what is the best tool to measure that? And sometimes it's just good old-fashioned intercept surveys to something much more complicated like a camera monitoring system. But, I'm a big fan of using the tools that we know already work, but again, defining it based on what you're actually trying to measure. Just as a reminder, we do still have time for more questions, and I'm just waiting to see if we have any more questions in the question box. I think at that time, we've answered a lot of them. We probably haven't answered all of your questions as they will continue to come up for you. So we've put Jenna's contact information. Jenna is a program associate at Transportation for America, and she can help field all of the questions that you might have for us. As a reminder, the application deadline is October 20th, which is not next Monday, but the Monday afterwards. We would love to hear from you, though, in the interim. Do you have questions, concerns, things you want to talk out? Both Beth and I are available to hop on the phone with you. and talk through that, just let Jenna know, and she'll make sure that whoever is the right person to talk to you about that. And with that, just to let you know, we have had some questions about whether this is recorded. We did record this, and so this will be available if you want to share it with your colleagues. We'll also share the PDF on our website. Again, the application materials are posted on our website, and I look forward to hearing and reading all of your applications. And with that, have a good afternoon or midday, depending on where you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please stand by.